Ex-mate invited Omega to shame. Omega returned as the Alpha King's chosen Luna. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let's get back to our main character. Emily Weaver stood in the center of the gathering hall, her heart pounding in her chest as the murmurs and whispers surrounded her. She was no stranger to being looked down upon, but this time, it felt different. The air was thick with anticipation. The ceremony had begun, and the atmosphere was electric, but not in a way that made her feel welcome. She could feel the cold stares of the other Omegas, the judgment from the pack members, all silently mocking her. As the youngest and weakest Omega of her pack, Emily had long been the subject of ridicule. She had always been different, softer, gentler, and perhaps, in their eyes, weak. She had never been chosen before, and it seemed that today would be no different. She felt the weight of the pack's expectations, their belief that she was nothing more than a failure. Her scent, unlike the other Omegas, was faint. It lacked the strength and power that made the Alphas desire her. And so, she stood there, at the back of the line, invisible, unwanted. Her heart ached as the first few Omegas were claimed, their fates sealed with a glance from the strong, confident Alphas. The crowd cheered, and the ritual continued without a single Alpha even glancing her way. Emily's gaze fell to the floor, her hands trembling slightly as she tried to keep herself from breaking down. But as the last few Omegas were chosen, something strange happened. A shift in the room. The whispers stopped. The air seemed to thicken. And then, the doors to the hall opened, and there he was. Alpha King Alexander Hale, the ruler of the Northern Territories. His presence filled the room, a powerful aura that immediately drew the attention of every pack member. He was tall, his posture commanding, and his eyes were cold, like the winter moon. The moment he stepped inside, the energy in the room changed. All eyes turned to him, and even the most powerful Alphas in the room bowed their heads in respect. But not Emily. She stood frozen, her heart racing as she tried to keep her composure. She had heard the rumors about him, how he had never shown mercy to anyone, how his heart was as cold as frost. He was a legend, a king whose mere presence made the strongest tremble. But what happened next, no one could have predicted. Instead of making his way to the front to claim one of the stronger Omegas, Alexander's gaze landed on Emily. His eyes, sharp and piercing, locked onto hers. The room fell silent. She felt her breath catch in her throat. It was as though time had stopped, and all she could do was look into his eyes. Alexander stepped forward, his boots clicking softly against the stone floor, his gaze never leaving hers. The silence was deafening as he approached her. And then, to Emily's surprise, he spoke, his voice low and commanding, "She's mine." The entire room went quiet, shocked by his words. Emily couldn't believe what she was hearing. The Alpha King, the most powerful man in the room, had just claimed her as his own. The whispers began again, but this time, they were not mocking her. They were filled with awe, with disbelief. Emily's heart raced as she tried to comprehend what had just happened. She had been nothing, invisible, a mere shadow in the pack. But now, in front of everyone, she had been chosen by the Alpha King. The pack could only stare as Alexander Hale, the ruler of the Northern Territories, declared Emily Weaver as his Luna. "You're not weak," he said, his voice soft but filled with authority. "You're my mate, and the time has come for you to stand by my side." Emily couldn't speak. She couldn't move. Her world had just been turned upside down. From the rejected Omega to the chosen Luna of the Alpha King, her life had changed in an instant. The hall was silent, the weight of Alexander's declaration still hanging in the air. Emily stood frozen, her heart racing, unable to comprehend what had just happened. She had always known herself as the weakest. Omega, the one who was never chosen, the one who was pushed to the sidelines. And now, here she was, being claimed by the Alpha King himself, the most powerful and feared figure in the land. His eyes, intense and unyielding, locked onto hers as he stepped closer, the energy around him practically crackling with authority. She could feel her legs shaking, but her body refused to move. The shock was too great, the disbelief too overwhelming. Alexander did not look away, his presence commanding her attention. "You will stand by my side," he said, his voice low, yet it resonated with a force that sent a shiver down Emily's spine. "From this moment, you are not the weak Omega you once were. You are my Luna." The words echoed through her mind, and though they should have been comforting, they left her feeling more confused than ever. Luna. The title felt foreign, unattainable, a dream she had never dared to even imagine. She was just Emily, a simple Omega with nothing to offer. And yet, here she was, about to become the Luna of the Alpha King. The pack members watched in stunned silence, their eyes wide with disbelief. The murmurs began to spread, but they were not filled with mockery this time. There was awe in their voices, a reverence that only the most powerful Alpha could inspire. Emily could barely process the weight of it all. She had gone from being the pack's joke to being the chosen mate of the most powerful Alpha in the land. The weight of the transformation was almost too much to bear. Alexander turned his gaze towards the rest of the pack, his eyes sweeping across the room, and they all immediately dropped their heads in deference. It was clear that no one would dare question his decision. The Alpha King had spoken, and his word was law. Emily's world had shifted in an instant, and she was no longer invisible. She was not just anyone. She was his. "Come," Alexander said, his voice gentle now, yet still carrying the same undeniable command. "It's time for us to leave." He held out his hand, and Emily, still in a daze, reached out to take it. The moment their hands touched, a strange warmth spread through her, a connection she couldn't explain, but one that felt incredibly right. As they walked together, out of the hall, the pack parted to make way for them, their eyes filled with curiosity and respect. Emily could feel their gazes on her, but it didn't matter anymore. She was no longer the weak Omega. She was his Luna. The air outside was cool against her skin, and the weight of the world still pressed down on her shoulders. But as she stood beside Alexander, she felt a strange sense of peace. For the first time in her life, she wasn't alone. And maybe, just maybe, she wasn't as weak as she had always thought. Alexander led her to a waiting carriage, his hand never leaving hers. As they climbed inside, Emily looked out the window at the pack she had known her entire life, now a distant memory. The life she had known was gone, replaced by something new, something unknown. But one thing was certain, her life would never be the same. As the carriage began to move, Emily finally spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "Are you sure about this?" she asked, her words laced with doubt. Alexander's gaze softened as he looked at her, and for the first time, she saw a glimpse of something other than the cold, commanding king. "I'm sure," he said, his voice steady and reassuring. "You are my Luna, and nothing will ever change that." As the carriage rumbled through the night, Emily leaned back against the plush seat, her mind still racing. The world outside the window blurred in the darkness, the only sound the rhythmic clatter of the wheels against the cobblestones. She felt a strange mix of emotions, confusion, fear, and something else she couldn't quite place. She had been living her entire life as an invisible Omega, unnoticed and discarded by those around her. But now, everything had changed. She wasn't just another Omega anymore. She was Alexander Hale's Luna, the Alpha King's mate. The weight of the title was heavy on her shoulders, and yet, for the first time in her life, she felt a sense of belonging. Alexander had claimed her, and with that claim, she knew her life would never be the same. As the night passed, she caught glimpses of the magnificent landscape passing by, rolling hills, vast forests, and towering mountains in the distance. They were heading toward the castle, the heart of Alexander's kingdom. She had heard stories of its grandeur, but seeing it with her own eyes was a different experience. It was majestic, towering over the land like a monument to power. The lights of the castle gleamed in the distance, an imposing fortress of stone and steel. Emily felt a knot form in her stomach. What was her place in this world? The world of the Alphas, of power, of royalty. She had never felt like she belonged in this world. But now, as she traveled toward the castle, she knew she would have to face it head-on. "We're almost there." Alexander's voice broke through her thoughts, soft but commanding. Emily turned to look at him. He sat across from her, his gaze steady and unwavering, his posture relaxed but still radiating authority. "Are you nervous?" he asked, his tone gentle. Emily hesitated before nodding. "I don't know what to expect. I've never been part of this world." Alexander's gaze softened as he studied her. "You'll find your place," he said. "It may take time, but you are my Luna. You will always have a place by my side." Emily felt a warmth spread through her chest at his words. For the first time in her life, someone had told her she had value. She had never heard those words from anyone before. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice barely audible. Alexander smiled, but it was a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "You don't have to thank me," he said, his voice tinged with a hint of sadness. "I know what it feels like to be burdened with expectations, to feel like you don't belong. But you're not alone anymore. I'm here." Emily didn't know how to respond to that. She wasn't sure if she could truly believe him, if she could trust that he would always be there. But a small part of her, the part that had spent her whole life yearning for belonging, believed him. As the carriage continued its journey, Emily stared out the window, her thoughts swirling in the quiet night. The castle loomed closer with each passing minute. It was no longer just a distant dream. It was real, and she was about to step into a world she had only ever imagined. She didn't know what the future held, but for the first time, she felt a spark of hope. Maybe, just maybe, this was the beginning of a new chapter in her life. A chapter where she didn't have to hide in the shadows. A chapter where she was seen, valued, and most importantly, loved. The castle gates loomed before Emily, massive and unyielding, their stone walls stretching high into the sky. The carriage slowed as it approached the entrance, and Emily's heart raced in her chest. She had spent her life in the shadows, hidden from the world, never expecting to be a part of something so grand, so monumental. But now, here she was, on the verge of stepping into a world she had only ever heard of in stories. As the carriage came to a stop, Alexander turned to her with a soft smile. "Are you ready?" he asked, his voice steady, though there was a trace of something softer in it now. Emily hesitated, glancing at the towering gates that seemed to symbolize everything she had never been able to touch: the power, the strength, the control. "I don't know," she whispered, her voice full of uncertainty. "I've never been a part of anything like this." Alexander's smile widened, and for a moment, he seemed less like the imposing Alpha King and more like the man who had promised her she wasn't alone. "You will be," he said simply. "Now, let's step into your future." As they stepped out of the carriage, Emily felt the cool night air on her skin. The castle was alive with light, its towering spires glistening under the moonlight. She had never seen anything so beautiful, so imposing. The grandeur of it all made her feel small, but at the same time, it filled her with awe. Alexander led her inside, and the vast halls of the castle unfolded before her, the stone floors polished and shining, the walls adorned with tapestries and portraits of past kings and queens. Emily's gaze wandered, taking in the beauty of the place, but a small part of her couldn't help but feel like she didn't belong here. She had always been the outsider, the one left behind, and now, standing in the heart of this powerful kingdom, she felt like an imposter. "This is your home now." Alexander's voice broke through her thoughts, and she turned to find him watching her with a gentle, knowing look in his eyes. "You are my Luna. This is your place." The words were comforting, but they also made her heart swell with a mixture of fear and excitement. She wasn't just Emily Weaver anymore. She was the Alpha King's Luna. The thought seemed impossible, and yet, here she was, standing beside him in a place that had once felt like a distant dream. "Come," Alexander said, offering his arm to her. "Let me show you to your chambers." As they walked through the halls, Emily couldn't help but marvel at the beauty of the castle. The walls were lined with ancient artifacts, each one telling the story of a long and storied history. She had never been one for luxury or wealth, but there was something about this place, something about the way Alexander spoke of it, that made her feel like she was a part of something far greater than herself. They stopped in front of a large set of double doors, and Alexander turned to her with a serious expression. "This is your room," he said. "It's yours, Emily. You're free to make it your own. I want you to feel comfortable here, to feel at home." Emily nodded, her throat tightening as she looked at the doors. It was all so overwhelming. The castle, the power, the responsibilities. But as Alexander placed a hand on the door, pushing it open, she felt a strange sense of calm wash over her. Inside was a room fit for a queen, the bed large and inviting, the walls decorated with rich tapestries, and the windows overlooking the sprawling lands of the kingdom. It was breathtaking, and for the first time, Emily felt like she might just be able to make a place for herself in this world. As she stepped inside, Alexander followed her, his presence still strong beside her. "You are no longer the girl you once were," he said softly. "You are my Luna, and this is your home now. You will never be alone again." Emily turned to face him, and in his eyes, she saw the truth of his words. For the first time in her life, she felt like she belonged. She was no longer just an Omega. She was Alexander Hale's Luna, and she was ready to embrace the future that awaited her. The next few days passed in a blur for Emily. She was still adjusting to the overwhelming change in her life, and every new experience seemed to hit her with the force of a storm. The castle, with its towering stone walls and intricate tapestries, felt like both a dream and a prison. Despite the comfort of her new room, despite the luxury that surrounded her, Emily still felt like an outsider. She wasn't used to this world, and no matter how many times Alexander reassured her, a part of her wondered if she truly belonged here. But Alexander, ever the steady presence at her side, made sure she felt seen. Every morning, he would join her for breakfast in the grand dining hall, where the sunlight streamed in through the tall windows, casting a warm glow on everything. The staff, always attentive, made sure she had everything she needed, but it was Alexander's presence that made the room feel less intimidating. "How are you feeling today?" he asked one morning as they sat down at the long table. His tone was gentle, but there was a genuine concern in his eyes. Emily smiled faintly, trying to hide the unease that had been with her since her arrival. "I'm adjusting," she said, the words feeling strange in her mouth. "It's just a lot to take in." Alexander nodded, as though he understood exactly what she meant. "It will take time," he said reassuringly. "But you are not alone. I am here with you always." His words were meant to comfort, but there was something in the way he said them that made her feel as though he was also trying to convince himself. Emily appreciated his efforts, but she couldn't ignore the nagging feeling that she was being pulled into a world that wasn't hers to begin with. As the days passed, she tried her best to learn the customs and expectations of the castle. She met with the other members of the royal court, who were all kind and welcoming, but still, she felt like an outsider. The other Omegas who had once looked down on her now treated her with respect, even reverence, but Emily couldn't shake the feeling that she was being judged, that her worth was still being measured by the position she now held rather than who she truly was. It was in moments like these, when she was left alone with her thoughts, that the weight of her new reality hit her hardest. She wasn't just any Omega anymore. She was the Luna of the Alpha King. And with that title came expectations, responsibilities, and a life she had never imagined for herself. One evening, after a long day of meetings and introductions, Emily found herself standing on the balcony of her room, gazing out at the vast kingdom stretching before her. The moon was high in the sky, casting a soft, silvery light over the land. She closed her eyes, letting the cool breeze wash over her, trying to find some peace in the quiet of the night. "You look lost in thought," a familiar voice said from behind her. Emily turned to see Alexander standing in the doorway, his expression unreadable. "I suppose I am," she replied softly. He stepped forward, his gaze never leaving her. "You don't have to figure it all out at once," he said gently. "You don't have to carry the weight of this kingdom on your shoulders alone. I'm here, and we'll take it one step at a time." There was something in his voice, a sincerity that made Emily's heart ache. She nodded, but the uncertainty still lingered in her chest. "I'm trying," she said quietly. Alexander moved closer, standing beside her as they both looked out at the kingdom below. "You don't have to try so hard to be someone you're not," he said, his voice low. "You're enough just as you are." Emily turned to look at him, her heart swelling with emotion. His words, so simple, yet so powerful, made her feel like maybe, just maybe, she wasn't as lost as she thought. Maybe, with his help, she could find her place here, in this world that was so different from everything she had known. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice thick with gratitude. Alexander smiled softly, his eyes warm. "You're welcome," he said. "Now let's take this one step at a time, together." And in that moment, Emily felt a glimmer of hope, a tiny spark that told her maybe this was where she was meant to be after all. The days that followed were filled with more lessons, more introductions, and more overwhelming experiences for Emily. Despite Alexander's constant reassurance, she couldn't shake the feeling that she was still just a guest in his world, never quite able to settle into the role of Luna that had been thrust upon her. She had grown up in a quiet village, far removed from the politics and power struggles of the pack, and now, she was expected to be the heart of that power. Alexander had been kind, always by her side, guiding her through every new situation, but she could see the weight of his responsibilities pressing down on him as well. He never let it show, but Emily knew he was a king with a kingdom to rule, and his burden was far greater than hers. One evening, after yet another long day of meetings and formalities, Emily found herself in the gardens, hoping to clear her mind. The sun had just set, and the cool evening air brushed against her skin as she walked through the carefully manicured paths, her mind swirling with doubt and uncertainty. She had been given everything she could have wanted: comfort, luxury, safety. But what did it all mean if she couldn't find a way to truly belong? She had been a disappointment her entire life, never meeting the expectations of those around her. Now, she was supposed to stand beside a king, to rule by his side, and she didn't feel like she was ready. Her steps slowed as she reached the center of the garden, where a large fountain sat, its water sparkling in the fading light. She took a deep breath, closing her eyes as she tried to calm her thoughts. "Emily," a voice called softly from behind her. She turned to find Alexander standing a few steps away, his expression unreadable. "I was wondering where you went," he said, his tone gentle. Emily offered him a small smile, though it didn't reach her eyes. "Just needed some fresh air," she replied. Alexander nodded, walking toward her. "I understand," he said quietly. "This life can be overwhelming at times. But you don't have to carry it all by yourself." Emily glanced at him, his words resonating in her heart. She had never been able to carry the weight of her past, and now she was being asked to carry the future of the pack, too. She didn't know if she was strong enough. "I don't know if I can do this," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "I've spent my whole life being overlooked, being weak. How can I suddenly be the one who holds everything together?" Alexander's gaze softened, and he stepped closer, his presence comforting despite the immense power. He radiated. "You're not weak," he said firmly. "You're stronger than you realize. You've been through more than most could ever imagine, and yet here you are. You are my Luna, and that means more than any title ever could. You are more than enough." Emily's heart swelled at his words, but the doubt still lingered. She had never seen herself as strong. She had always been the one who had to hide in the shadows, who had to endure the ridicule of others. "But what if I fail?" she asked, her voice trembling. "What if I'm not enough for you, for the pack?" Alexander reached out, gently cupping her face with his hand, his thumb brushing her cheek in a soft gesture of comfort. "You won't fail," he said, his voice steady and reassuring. "Because you don't have to do this alone. I'm right here, with you. And together, we will face whatever comes. You don't have to be perfect, Emily. You just have to be yourself." His words were like a balm to her soul, soothing the worries that had been weighing her down. She felt the tension in her chest ease, though the uncertainty still lingered. But with him by her side, she knew she wasn't alone. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. Alexander smiled, the warmth in his gaze filling her heart. "You don't have to thank me," he said softly. "I promised you, Emily. I will always be here, and I will never let you go." As he pulled her into his arms, Emily allowed herself to relax, to let go of the fear that had been gripping her heart for so long. In that moment, she realized that maybe, just maybe, she was strong enough to do this. Together, they would face whatever the future held. And for the first time since she had arrived at the castle, she felt like she could truly call this place home. Days turned into weeks, and Emily continued to adjust to her new life alongside Alexander. As the days passed, she grew more comfortable in the castle, though the weight of her new role still pressed heavily on her shoulders. She had spent her entire life as an outsider, but now, she was expected to be the heart of the pack. There were moments when the uncertainty would creep in, but Alexander's unwavering support kept her grounded. One morning, as the sun began to rise over the kingdom, Emily found herself in the royal gardens once again. The air was crisp and cool, and the soft rustle of leaves in the breeze was soothing. She had come to the gardens often, finding peace in the quiet moments before the world around her began to stir. As she walked along the familiar path, her thoughts wandered to the future, to the responsibilities she now had as Luna. It was a title she had never sought, but now it was hers, and with it came a world she hadn't fully understood until now. It wasn't just about leading the pack, it was about standing by Alexander's side, being his partner in everything. She had never been a leader, never had to make decisions that would affect so many people, and it scared her. But Alexander had shown her time and time again that she was not alone in this. As if on cue, she heard the soft crunch of footsteps behind her. She turned to find Alexander approaching, his usual confident stride softened by a warmth in his gaze. "I thought I might find you here," he said, his voice calm and comforting. "The gardens always seem to bring you peace." Emily smiled faintly, appreciating his understanding. "I need the quiet sometimes," she admitted. "It's hard to silence the noise in my mind with everything that's changed." Alexander stepped closer, his presence a steadying force. "I understand more than you know," he said softly. "You're not alone in this, Emily. You never will be." She looked up at him, her heart swelling with a mixture of gratitude and uncertainty. "I'm trying," she said quietly. "But sometimes I wonder if I'm really enough. I've never been this kind of person. I've always been the one who stood on the sidelines, watching others take the lead." Alexander's eyes softened as he reached out to gently lift her chin, making sure her gaze met his. "You're more than enough," he said firmly. "You're not just the Omega you once were. You're my Luna, my equal, and together, we will lead this pack. I know it's hard, but I also know you're capable of more than you think. You've already proven that to me." Emily felt a surge of warmth in her chest at his words. It was hard to believe, but there was something in the way he looked at her, something in his voice, that made her want to trust him. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. Alexander smiled, his hand still resting on her chin. "You don't need to thank me," he said softly. "You're my partner, Emily. We're in this together." They stood there for a moment, the weight of his words settling between them. For the first time, Emily felt a spark of hope that maybe, just maybe, she could rise to the challenge of being Luna. With Alexander by her side, she wasn't alone. She had a partner, a protector, and a love that she had never dreamed was possible. As they walked back to the castle together, Emily felt lighter than she had in weeks. The path ahead was still uncertain, but with Alexander's support and her growing belief in herself, she knew she could face whatever came next. She was no longer just Emily Weaver, the Omega who had been overlooked. She was Emily Hale, the Luna of the Alpha King, and she was ready to embrace her future. The days following Emily's quiet revelation to Alexander were filled with a mix of unease and small victories. She spent her time learning the intricacies of royal life, often under the careful guidance of the court's elders, but it was the quiet moments with Alexander that made all the difference. They had spent hours talking in the gardens, walking the castle's halls, and sharing meals where, for the first time in her life, Emily felt seen, not just for her title, but for the person she truly was. One afternoon, after yet another long series of meetings with the pack's advisors, Emily found herself standing in front of the grand windows of her chambers. The sunlight filtered through the stained glass, casting colorful reflections across the stone floor. The castle was alive with activity, its halls echoing with the voices of servants, advisors, and visitors alike. It felt like another world, so different from the quiet, simple life she had left behind. As she gazed out at the sprawling kingdom, her thoughts turned inward. She wasn't just a figurehead, not just the Luna to the Alpha King. She was becoming a part of something greater. But even as she tried to accept this reality, doubts crept in. Was she really cut out for this? Was she truly capable of leading alongside Alexander, of being the Luna he needed her to be? She was not the powerful, fierce Omega she had imagined when she was younger. She had always felt small, fragile, and now that fragility seemed even more apparent in a world so full of strength and dominance. The sound of a soft knock on the door broke her thoughts, and she turned to see Alexander standing in the doorway, his expression soft but serious. "May I come in?" he asked, his voice low and comforting. Emily smiled, trying to push her doubts aside. "Of course," she said, stepping away from the window. Alexander entered the room and closed the door behind him, his presence immediately filling the space. He was the Alpha King, powerful and composed, but there was always a gentleness in his gaze when it came to her. "I've been looking for you," he said, his voice warm. "I thought you might be here." Emily nodded, feeling a weight lift from her shoulders just at the sound of his voice. "I needed some time to think," she confessed, her voice barely above a whisper. "There's so much to learn, so much responsibility. I'm not sure I'm ready for all of it." Alexander's gaze softened, and he took a step closer to her. "You're already doing it," he said, his voice steady. "Every day, you're learning, growing, and being exactly what this pack needs. I never expected you to be perfect, Emily. I only ever wanted you to be you." Emily felt a warmth in her chest at his words, but the doubt still lingered. "I've always been the one on the sidelines, the one who was overlooked. How am I supposed to suddenly lead, to stand beside you and help guide this kingdom?" she asked, her voice shaky with uncertainty. Alexander placed a hand gently on her shoulder, his touch grounding her. "Because you've already shown more strength than you realize. You've survived things most would never even dream of. You've faced your fears, your doubts, and still, you stand. That is strength, Emily. You are my Luna because you are exactly who this kingdom needs. Not because of some title, but because of who you are." Emily looked up at him, meeting his steady gaze. In his eyes, she saw no doubt, no fear of her being anything less than what she needed to be. She saw only confidence, trust, and a deep love that made her heart swell. "I don't know if I can ever be everything you want me to be," she said softly, her voice full of vulnerability. "But I will try. I will try for you, for us, and for this kingdom." Alexander smiled, his eyes filled with pride. "That's all I ever needed from you," he said, his voice warm with affection. "And I will be here every step of the way. You are not alone, Emily. You never will be." In that moment, Emily felt something shift inside her. The weight of her fears and uncertainties didn't vanish, but they didn't feel as heavy. With Alexander by her side, she realized that she didn't have to be perfect. She didn't have to be the fierce leader she had always imagined. She only needed to be herself, and that was enough. The future was uncertain, but for the first time in her life, Emily felt ready to face it. Together, they would build something strong, something lasting. And that was all that mattered. The weeks that followed brought a sense of calm to Emily, though it was a different kind of calm than she had known before. The castle, with all its grandeur and power, had slowly become more familiar. She spent her days learning the intricacies of royal duties alongside Alexander, meeting with pack leaders, and learning the deeper aspects of pack politics. At night, she would retreat to the gardens, finding solace in the quiet of the world outside the castle walls. It was her escape, her time to reflect, to breathe. But even in these peaceful moments, a part of her struggled to adjust. The expectations of being Luna were ever present, and while she had grown stronger, she still found herself questioning whether she was truly enough for this role. Alexander, ever patient, continued to be her steady anchor. He was there when she needed him, supporting her without hesitation. He never pushed her to be someone she wasn't. Instead, he encouraged her to grow into the person she was meant to be. One evening, after a long day of meetings and discussions, Alexander took Emily by the hand and led her to a secluded corner of the castle grounds. The sun had just set, and the cool evening air wrapped around them as they walked in silence. "I know it's been a lot," Alexander said, breaking the quiet. "But you're doing amazing. The pack is starting to see you as I do, strong, capable, and more than just the Luna of my side." Emily smiled faintly, the weight of his words settling in her heart. "It's not easy," she confessed. "I feel like I'm constantly trying to prove that I belong here. Sometimes, I wonder if I'm truly the right person for this role." Alexander stopped and turned to face her, his expression serious yet full of warmth. "You are," he said, his voice firm but kind. "You don't have to prove anything. You were chosen for a reason. Not because of some title or position, but because of who you are. You're the heart of this kingdom, Emily. And you're the only one I want by my side." Emily's heart fluttered at his words, but the lingering doubt still clung to her. "I don't feel like the heart of anything," she admitted, her voice quiet. "I feel like I'm stumbling through, hoping no one notices that I don't quite know what I'm doing." Alexander's hand gently cupped her cheek, and he looked at her with such intensity that she felt the strength in his gaze. "That's the beauty of it," he said softly. "You don't need to have all the answers. You don't need to be perfect. You just need to be yourself. And I will always be here to guide you, to help you find your way." Emily felt a rush of warmth flood through her at his words, the doubts that had plagued her for weeks starting to fade. Alexander's faith in her was unwavering, and in that moment, she realized that perhaps she didn't need to be perfect. She didn't need to have everything figured out. She just needed to trust herself and trust him. The quiet evening stretched on, the stars slowly making their appearance in the sky. For the first time in weeks, Emily felt a deep sense of peace settle in her heart. She was not alone. She had Alexander by her side, and together, they would face whatever challenges came their way. It wasn't about being perfect, it was about being a team, about growing together, supporting one another. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. Alexander smiled, his thumb brushing across her cheek. "No thanks necessary. We're in this together, Emily. And we always will be." As they stood there, under the night sky, Emily knew that the road ahead would still have its obstacles. But with Alexander beside her, she felt ready to face whatever came their way. She wasn't just Emily Weaver anymore. She was Emily Hale, the Luna of the Alpha King. And for the first time, she felt like she had a place in this world. A place where she truly belonged.